Thanks everyone so much for coming. I'm Eve. I'm the symposium director at POP. I'm so excited that we're doing this full day of workshops and panels all about the climate crisis and music. And this is a part of a partnership that we're doing with Music Declares Emergency. And it's also kind of a part one of a thing investigating this issue. And on October 21st in Toronto, there's going to be a bigger climate summit about this. So I encourage people to check it out and continue talking about these things there. I don't want to take up too much time. I want to throw it off to the panel. I'd just like to introduce Peggy Hogan, who's going to moderate this conversation about labels and sustainability and all the things that go into that. So please join me in welcoming Peggy Hogan and this entire panel.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to get applause just for existing today. Day 4 Pop. I'm Peggy. I work at a label called Next Door Records, which is an imprint of outside music. We're semi-based in Toronto, but we're kind of all over the country now. And I'm very excited to have this conversation about record labels and sustainability and how to be greener as we produce evil, destructive vinyl. It's a topic that is a relatively new topic at our label, and I know some of the panelists here are the same boat. There's other panelists that have been thinking about it more deeply, so very excited to dive in and learn more. I'm going to hand it off to you, and let's all introduce ourselves.
Hi, my name is William. I work at Top Shelf Records. We're based all over the States and now here with me. And I do PR and digital stuff, so not necessarily tied directly to sustainability and carbon emissions as we normally associate with the music industry, but hope to learn from my fellow panelists today.
Hi, I'm Annika. I work at Bella Union. I do A&R and project management, and we're based in London, UK. And yeah, it's been part of the conversation that we've been having is how we can improve our environmental impact, particularly in like stuff like every single record traditionally is wrapped in plastic, and if you like multiply that by the thousands of records that are produced, it's difficult. So difficult to let that sit as part of our manufacturing process. So yeah, these are the things that we are thinking about.
Hello, I'm Andy from Partisan Records. I oversee our operations, and part of what that involves is our supply chain, including physical production and getting our records from the plant to distributor to stores and ultimately to fans. So very relevant to our conversation today. And yeah, it's something that we've been thinking about a lot more seriously over the last couple of years. And it's been an education process for us to really understand what we can do as a label to be more environmentally conscious. But yeah, glad to be talking about this with everyone.
I want to dive in with a very broad, open-ended approach to this topic, just so we can kind of find some touchstone moments here. But I guess I want to kind of weave our way into what is the music industry's role in climate justice in an ideal world. And what is the responsibility of record labels when it comes to this topic? Anyone who wants to take it, go for it.
Sure, I'll start. I think, record labels really are no different from any other company. And I think, when you're operating a business, it's becomes so important to be environmentally conscious in everything that we do. If we don't take care of our home, our earth, then there really is no future for record labels. So, sorry, what was that? Our responsibility as a label. So, so in terms of like what we do, thinking about the materials that we use, how we're getting our records to fans, weighing things like, are we shipping things by sea versus air? what's going to be the least carbon emissions. And then also, for a record label, I think we are in a unique position where we work with a lot of artists that are influential and can help get the message out. So I think it's important for us to work with our artists, for us to all to be educated and understand the situation, and and have a voice in the community.
Yeah, I guess like a lot of people get into the music industry because they love music and they love working with artists, and somehow we have to marry that with being a business and living in this capitalist infrastructure of literally everything. So you have to reconcile that you need to produce to survive, but I think also recognizing where you can produce less. So for example, the more records you press, you benefit from the economies of scale, you save money. So sometimes it's in fact cheaper to manufacture, say, 1,000 CDs instead of 500 CDs, knowing full well that you'll have 300 CDs left over. And sometimes you just have to make the choice that it's going to be sold out and 200 people won't get the CD. But there are other means of listening to music now, and this is the world we live in. And I think it's not just like a question for record labels, it's a question for everybody living in this structure, this world, this mortal coil, how we can take care of the planet we live on.
Yeah, I think we're so dependent on like all these other third parties, right, that kind of like have no accountability to us. So it's a constant struggle, right, of like, how do we survive? You have to produce to survive, but there's not many great options. So like ultimately our responsibility turns into like, who do we give our business to, which is kind of feels like a cop-out. But there are good businesses out there that are trying to produce green as possible vinyl, for instance. But for us, like they're in the Netherlands, Deep Grooves. I don't know if you've heard of them, but like it has to cross the world to get to us, and we haven't even received product from them yet, like from our first production runs. So like our responsibility is kind of just like sitting around and waiting to see if the green as possible vinyl is good, but then if a band needs it for tour, we have to air freight it, and then it kind of defeats the purpose. Yeah. So again, it's like we're stuck being dependent to these complex structures and supply chain deficiencies, and I feel like really our responsibility then would turn into supporting campaigns for demilitarization across the globe, because that's one of the biggest enemies of climate justice right now, right? So it's hard, because then, okay, if you're working toward demilitarization, you're not like running your record label anymore. So it's a tough balance, right?
I think just being able to talk about it is massive, because to try and solve a problem, you need to have imagination, and you need to have creativity, and you need to consider options that maybe haven't existed before, that you're going to try out and experiment with. And yeah, I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think record labels have an interesting kind of twofold thing going on, in the sense that, you know, we're cultural producers and we're amplifying the voices of artists that can really have an impact in terms of the way that people understand issues, and amplify the importance of understanding things like climate justice and sustainability. On the other hand, you know, we are part of the machine, and we're kind of handcuffed to producing physical product. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance and contradiction in terms of like, how do we move in a better direction, and yet, you know, we're tied to means of production that have been there for a really, really long time and haven't changed. I think I would like to kind of turn to what are kind of the key areas that each of your companies are looking at. Like, what do the internal conversations look like in terms of like thinking about producing physical product? What is the impact? Are you thinking about amplifying the message within the label? Is the roster involved in that kind of thing?
Yeah, so like Annika was saying, for us, we are a lot more thoughtful and careful about how much product we're manufacturing and making sure that we don't manufacture. We've definitely caught in the trap where we've made too many records, thinking that we're going to sell X amount, and then it doesn't happen, then we end up scrapping, and it just goes into the landfill, which is terrible. So just being much more careful and mindful about how much we're manufacturing. Also, the material that we're using. I think the industry does have some ways to go in terms of providing sustainable material for us to use. Some of the recycled product, I mean, you don't want to compromise the quality of the product, but sometimes the recycled material isn't great. And whatever product you want to sell, you want people to keep forever. And also things like using lighter weight vinyl. You're using less material. And the big thing I think we're also talking about is when we're manufacturing internationally, let's ship it by sea and not by air, and you reduce your emissions there. So some of it's our products and also how we operate as a business. For example, when we're getting office supplies, we shop locally, whether that be for anything from pens, paper, to if we're getting snacks for the office and things like that. Just being mindful of the community that we're in and not using Amazon or other things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much the same at Bella Union as well. We are a small label. There's only 5 of us that work there, but we work with some big artists. The benefit of being a small label is it's easier to have a conversation with your staff and implement some changes. I guess the challenge that we're facing a lot is just it can sometimes be way more expensive to take the environmentally friendly option and you pass that cost to the consumer, and there's a point in which they won't want to buy the product even if it's a more ethical product. One discussion that we're having as well is when should we, there are some releases that maybe we shouldn't even be creating physical product. Over the years, there's been so many releases that we've worked on where we've ended up just with way too much stock. And then you're in that position of, okay, well, we need somewhere to store it. And then eventually there's the realization that maybe no one will ever buy it. And then you have to destroy it. And it's just awful. It's really awful. And I think that is something that we've talked a lot about and it's changing. And then one of the challenges that we face is when we get the pressing figures wrong and we do too few records and then the artist isn't happy because they have to wait for the repress, which can take a really long time. And then you're just caught in this trap of to be environmentally friendly, you essentially have to just move slower. And we live in a world that's so much now. We've all gotten used to it being this way. It's just a new challenge that we have to face to try and teach ourselves to slow down a bit, and that's okay. You will live if you get your record a little bit later, but it's just retraining your mind to accept that.
Yeah, we're at Top Shelf. We were kind of caught in the trap of long turnaround times. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with the vinyl situation right now. Vinyl manufacturing is backed up across the world. It basically takes more or less 12 months to press a record from start to finish, unless you have a really sick in with the pressing plant and you have a good deal. Maybe you can get 4 or 5 months turnaround, but that's very rare. So Top Shelf, we found ourselves in this position. We wanted to press records faster, and actually the only possible option was this plant called Deep Grooves in the Netherlands, and they press green as possible vinyl. I don't know the exact specifics, maybe you do, about what materials they use to press vinyl. But essentially they said they could do 6 months turnaround or something like that. So we put a bunch of projects in with them, but that was almost a year ago. We still haven't seen anything. Like you said, we had to raise the price of our vinyl, pass that on to the consumer. It's the goal is sustainability, but we haven't seen the product yet. So a little ironic because we went with this for all the right reasons, but it hasn't produced anything yet. So that's like one of the pitfalls that we've experienced in like, okay, we want to take this step. We know vinyl is like basically an atrocity in the world. Pressing plants produce tons of horrible chemicals, and in some places in the world, they just dump them into rivers. It's pretty bad. But yeah, we're caught in this trap of like, we're trying to do the right thing, but we can't even get what we need to run our business when we do so. So again, like we're dependent on these complex structures and third parties that aren't really helping us yet or equipped to help us yet.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is, working towards finding the right solution. So it's amazing that there are companies out there that have this option, but it's a bit of an experiment. But I think it's a worthwhile experiment. And I think, certainly for myself, like I don't come from a background of really understanding environmental science. This is something I'm interested in, something that's important to me, that's important to our company, but I'm not an expert. So a lot of this is like trying to learn and educate myself and our company, to educate our company on finding the right solutions. And I think part of that's also having conversations with our artists to help them also share the same philosophy and to help get them on the same page so that, when we do run into issues where maybe we'll be out of vinyl for a little bit and, are we all in agreement in principle that that is actually the better tack to take than to, rush and over-manufacture and everyone be okay with it. So.
Yeah, I think you touched on a great point, Andy. This is something that we also need to transmit to our rosters and get the artists on board, like the idea of slowing down and like managing artist expectations and helping them understand like, well, it's been this way for a long time and we're trying to implement changes that might impact how your release comes out or the number of vinyl we're going to press or whatever else. Just educating the rosters on the whole process. That being said, I do want to get a little bit more granular because we're here talking broadly about the impact of vinyl, and I think we all know that it is an impactful, challenging product to work with. Green vinyl, very new concept. The way that vinyl has been produced hasn't really changed since the dawn of printing records, So there are options. Like at our company, we work with Precision Pressing, and they have some green options. But it's like immediately, it's like, okay, well, you can do black. We have like 2 other colors. If you want color vinyl, like that's something. It's like, well, if we want to choose this XYZ artist, like your choices are now reduced, and there's a reason for that. Whatever else. Your sleeve might be of a different quality or, So I would love to delve deeper into like, what does green vinyl look like? What is that process? Have y'all experimented with it? Have you done any runs in a very, very green way? I know you're still waiting to see the results.
We haven't manufactured anything. We've looked at options. The issue that we've run into is every sample that we've gotten, the audio quality just hasn't been very good. So I don't think the technology is quite there yet. But again, it's like, maybe it doesn't have to sound perfect, But, on the other side, we are a record label. We want to put out good quality records, and sound is important to our artists and to our fans. So it's tricky, yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky and it's expensive as well. I think when we got a quote through from Deep Grooves, I think they're in Denmark. Are they in Denmark or are they definitely Netherlands?
I think it's the Netherlands.
Okay, well, there's another green plant in Denmark that maybe I'm thinking of then. And we got a quote back and it was just like, oh, it's going to cost a fortune to do it like this. And for projects where we won't be manufacturing a huge amount, like 1,000. So I think like it's a conversation that we're having with each artist individually to find the appropriate project where you could really go all out and make a product that maybe takes longer, maybe is more expensive. but I think the reality is like, yeah, a lot of artists, like their number one priority is to have a record that really sounds good and really looks good, and they love the way the package is, and finding the right plant to do that so far has been challenge. And we're also just under the thumb of this like vinyl manufacturing issue where everything takes so long, and you buy up capacity and then it gets moved, and you actually kind of don't have that much say over which project goes to which plant at the moment, the way that we work anyway, where we just have this allocation, and the options are we either press at wherever, Optimal or wherever, and we either press there or we like wait until a different slot becomes available, which could just like fully delay the record. So I think it's just like an ongoing conversation that we're having that has been difficult to put into effect.
But I do think it's promising that, you know, there's 2 separate companies that you guys have been talking to. There's a few companies that we've been talking to. I think it's close to where we will have better options. So I feel good about that.
Yeah, I think it's just like early days in a longer term movement, hopefully.
I think there's a new project happening in London actually that just got like 3.5 million pound injection or something, where they're doing on-demand eco vinyl.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
I don't know the name of it. I've just heard like whispers, like something in like Music Week or something.
I think it's the Soho House guy.
Okay.
I think that he's just like alt mega rich and owns loads of property, and I think he's like getting experimental.
Okay, well we
But
need
I think
that.
it's that. Yeah, yeah. We all need a Miss Havisham, a rich benefactor.
But I think that's just like one way that you can implement like green decisions in vinyl manufacturing. Like there's like with Deep Grooves, I think their whole thing is like they're printing using like recycled inks or something like that, some new material for the actual wax of the record. It's exciting stuff, green vinyl. There's many like steps of manufacturing where you can implement this, and maybe you could speak more to the supply chain. I don't know the exact specifics, but you know, yeah, you have the jacket, the inner sleeve, the record itself. Like these all come from different processes, so there's different steps where you can implement green options, so to speak. But I like the idea of an on-demand vinyl service, because then you don't have to take the risk of printing like 1,500 records. You don't know if you're going to sell all of them. Doing it on demand is kind of by design like a better idea, but I don't know how that works. It's still so new. It's not live yet. You can't place orders with them, so I don't know. It's like you said, early days.
Yeah, I think by virtue of having to be within capitalism, one of the things that labels can do is start asking. And I think the more that we are unified as record labels in terms of like we want these options, then the supply and demand situation will shift, and pressing plants will start kind of considering it and prioritizing, figuring out how to print vinyl that isn't full of toxic waste and still sounds good. So I think that's a very important thing that we can do as record labels, is to just push that demand forward. We've been talking a lot about physical product. I want to shift to a much more ephemeral side of sustainability and music, which is the digital footprint. Of course, I would say the main way that most music consumers are engaging with music is via streaming. And digital footprint is a really interesting thing, because when we think of like data and streaming and the way that we access music, it's like, oh, well, this has no impact. I'm in the we're all in the cloud. However, you know, like the data has to be stored somewhere. There's like servers in the desert that are using so much electricity. like even just producing devices that we're using to engage with this stuff has an impact. So I'm wondering if any of y'all think about that at your companies, from the big scale, which is streaming, down to even like managing your inboxes. Like how are you dealing with like the data at your own companies as well?
To be honest, the digital side is a bit of a mystery to me. We've tried to find out, try to like find studies about the impact of streaming on the environment, and there's just not a lot of information out there, at least none that we've been able to find that seems accurate. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know either, but I think on a like smaller scale, like how we function as a label, like we don't have an office, for example, we all work at home. It's more of like an individual approach to like, trying to use your stuff for as long as possible and buy something that lasts. And just like carrying that approach into the way we like, buy stuff for the label. But yeah, like it's kind of crazy the way that they build like laptops and phones and stuff, and you think, oh, this thing should last. Like it's like wild that we all have a phone like on us right now that is like essentially a computer, and some people go through them like just like nothing. So I think just being like mindful, like buying, if you're the person that breaks your phone, buy a case for your phone. And if you lose your phone, like get one of those neck chains, like stuff like that. But that's like very individual, personal approach to the way you consume rather than like company policy. But I think we all share that.
Yeah, similar to Top Shelf, we're fully remote, no office, but it's hard with digital because calculating energy use is like a really complex problem. Like you can't just point to energy used and say, oh, this is the type of energy that we did use for this, whether it was burning coal or renewables or whatever. Like it's hard to pinpoint that. So we virtually don't think about it, to be honest. Like the onus is put onto Spotify, to cool their server farm in the desert or what have you, and we pass the buck on to them, and like we don't think about it, and it is like this abstract thing, but it's also like a big challenge to calculate like what that energy use is, what the emissions are. So it's like we're just not equipped to do that as like a 6-person, 5-person label.
I think also there's like the problem of we live in such a complicated world at this point. Like the average person just doesn't understand the science between how, like I can speak for myself, how like data is stored and what energy is required of that. And, you need to understand that in order to figure out how to do it better and how to change it. And just, like I don't know how my phone works. I don't know how my computer works. Like I have a vague idea, but I couldn't like make a phone. So like you are putting your faith in companies with responsibility to find alternative ways of doing things that are environmentally conscious. And part of that is by showing demand for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's like a very scary crux of this conversation is that we do have to kind of put our trust into, very friendly, people-oriented companies like Spotify. I want to talk about shipping, which is something that we do have a little bit of control over as record labels. We've touched on how we're using pressing plants all over the world. We're having to ship product long distances. But there are newer options like merch on demand or printing on demand. You can consciously try and find a plant closer to home, things like that. So I'm wondering what that's looking like for each of your companies. What are the decisions that are being implemented around shipping product?
For us, it's just better long-term planning. And really building in that additional time to ship things by sea rather than by air in our calculations for release dates. So, if our understanding that it's going to take 6 months to manufacture a record, Then we build in an additional, 45 days for shipping by sea, and then you push the release. You set the release date based on that. So it is more longer term planning, and then the touring side of things is really complicated right now, and that's also requires really long term planning. I think just putting more thought into it, and then being committed to not shipping things by air, even if that means you're gonna miss a street date. And again, the challenge there is making sure that the artists understand and are on the same page, and it's not jeopardizing their career, their touring plans, their livelihood as well. It's making those types of conscious decisions and commitments.
Gosh, I'm gonna sound kind of pessimistic. We Top Shelf we find ourselves in an interesting position right now with regards to shipping. We were working with a fulfillment company based out of Austin, Texas. It's a UK-owned company. Their American headquarters is in Austin. They basically went bankrupt and didn't tell us, and they weren't shipping our products at all. So now it's on us to move our entire 15 plus years worth of stock to another place, which is like emissions hell. Like we're good, So again, being dependent on like a third party has kind of screwed us over, and the environment by extension, more importantly. And that's kind of like, I think one of the main themes of what we've been talking about is like just being dependent on like all of these third parties to help us be better, but we can't, because we have to move our entire inventory now. So we don't really have like an option of like, oh, we want to ship green right now. Like we have like a crisis. So
Let's hire 5,000 bike couriers.
yeah. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of like shipping right now, like just getting control of our stock back, which is not going to be an environmentally friendly process.
I'm less involved in shipping, but we do tend to press our records in Europe, so the shipping isn't as far as if, say, you guys are shipping in Europe and then sending to the US. We try and encourage people to buy locally as well, rather than, we've got a Bella Union store, we can ship worldwide, but we're in the UK, so support your local record store. That's something that we try and push.
The topic of touring, I think, is a very interesting one. And it's something that I think we should be talking to our rosters about. Like, do you need to do all of those dates? Is this a market you really need to visit? And does it benefit you, or are you just using a lot of gas? I'm wondering if there's any artists on your rosters that are thinking about touring in a different way. I know at Outside we have an artist, Abigail Lapel, that's done a couple tours on bike, which is possible for her because she is a solo singer-songwriter and all she needs is an acoustic guitar. But yeah, are there any strategies for changing the paradigm in terms of artists being on the road, especially if they're having to lug gear around, et cetera, et cetera?
That's a hard one, because for a lot of artists, touring is their bread and butter, and we won't tell you not to tour somewhere if that's what you want to do. I guess, yeah, it's a tough one. Like, I mean, I'm sat here and I flew here from the UK. Do I really need to be here? That's a question I need to ask myself in the future. It's like, do I need to take all of these trips? And do I have a responsibility to not do them anymore? I don't know the answer, because you have to figure out where it ends. Like, a lot of it, like, I think that airlines should be taxed an environmental tax, and it's the responsibility is on government to implement policy. Like, an individual, ultimately, like, oh God, it's so depressing. You can just feel quite powerless in amongst it all, because you're just like, does it actually make a difference if I fly to Montreal, or like, it's hard to know where to draw the lines, and I guess that's when with touring there are loads of micro decisions that you can make that can lessen the impact of being on the road. Just even things like having a water bottle with you, not accepting like bottled water in a green room and things like that, just like small decisions. But it's hard to know where to draw the lines with these kinds of questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like for us as a company, like we think about like travel. Like, do we have to go somewhere? Like, does it make sense for 5 people to go down to Austin for South by Southwest? Like maybe we just need one person there, two people there. And when we do travel, again, I'm guilty. I took a plane here as well, but maybe I could have taken a train, and sure, it would have taken longer. I would have planned better, but I would have had a smaller footprint for doing that. So, yeah, and then I think it just goes to like just our personal lives too, right? It's just an extension. Just every decision that we make, there is the easy, more costly option, or we can, do less and maybe take the longer road that is actually better for the earth.
I think there's a question of scale too, right? Like we're not probably working with like Harry Styles level type productions that require like a lot more carbon emissions to get the job done. So yeah, it's like at the end of the day, like some bands have to tour and they have to take the shitty van, but maybe there's like 2 bands piling into the van, and that's better than 2 vans. But at the end of the day, like at our level at least, like it's just we're not really equipped to like do anything about it. And I think that just comes back to the central point of like there's no infrastructure to help us with these things. Like in North America, trains are shit. Getting from one place to another, like without taking an airplane is kind of hard, or a car. So like there are these obstacles in the way pretty much at every turn. Yeah. with respect to touring especially.
And it's really expensive to take trains as well. And that's like, I think one of the things that you can do is like engage with politics, like go attend marches and vote for parties that have policies that you support. And, like in the UK, it's such a small country compared to Canada. Taking a train from London to the other side of the country costs a fortune. It costs like hundreds of pounds. Like if you want to go from London to Edinburgh, and say you want to go tomorrow, it's going to be like £200, or a flight would be £50. It's madness. And yeah, I think the older I get, the more confident I get in my politics and going to things that I feel like I want to support. And part of that is like nationalizing the railways. Transport and accessibility is massive, and it should be affordable. And it's run on a capitalist monopoly. Why not make it a public monopoly that serves the people and makes the option of like choosing whether to drive or fly or take a train so much easier because it's affordable. So I think just like having a personal belief system and like doing your own research is like kind of all you can do, because it's just like too big a problem. We're just little people in the big problem.
I think also, like in addition to politics, there are a lot of great organizations within the music industry that are really focused on environmental issues. It's great that Music Declares is part of this. There's another organization called Earth Percent, which is also amazing. And a lot of these organizations, they're there to either amplify the message, or Earth Percent, for example, is an organization where artists can contribute a certain percentage of their revenue to different environmental organizations. So that's actually an organization that we're talking to as a label and to our artists about, where maybe a certain percentage of their royalties and us as a label would match to donate to these organizations as well. So different ways that you can offset emissions and, like we said, like get the message out so people are also more conscious about it and thinking about it on a bigger level, not just within the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the downers of this conversation is like how powerless we all are. But as I think trying to have an impact on the infrastructure and changing the systemic problems at play here is one of the places where we actually do have a role. And I think it's very important to remember that, because it's easy to get lost in like how am I as one person, or like how am I as one company really going to make a difference? I want to kind of shift the conversation with one last formal question, and then open it up to the people here. So get your questions ready. I want to talk about something we touched on at the very beginning, like the role of creating culture that we have at labels, and how our rosters influence our conversations internally. At Nextdoor, we have the weather station on our roster, and she is kind of the face of climate justice in many ways in the music industry these days. And that has definitely sparked us to think more about like, well, if we're gonna release this record, we need to be thoughtful and responsible and amplify that message and change some of the ways that we work in order to support that release. So I'm wondering if that kind of feedback loop is happening in your companies, where artists are bringing issues forward that are being brought up internally, and vice versa, if the policies that you're implementing are influencing the way that the artists on your rosters are thinking about climate justice.
Yeah, it's great that it's become such a topic of conversation. So we are talking to our artists more. We have a lot of artists that are very interested in wanting to get involved. So I feel like we're in a better place than we were 2 years ago. We still have a long ways to go, but I think the first part of this is, having a conversation. And through these conversations, you figure out practical ways to actually get involved and move the issue forward. So, I think, all of us work at relatively small companies. We don't necessarily have the resources to dedicate fully to this issue. And there's a lot of, great labels out there that have, for example, Beggars has someone that is all they do is sustainability, which is great. And they're part of our community, and we can learn from them, from what they learn. And I think, just all of us being conscious, being part of the music community that's thinking about these types of issues is great. And I feel hopeful that, we can figure this out, even if we don't have the answers just quite yet.
Yeah, I think it's just going to take some time. We definitely are talking about it with artists who are thinking about it themselves already. It's not something that we're introducing them to. For example, we work with a Norwegian artist called Susanne Sundfør, and she made a record 5 years ago called Music for People in Trouble, and one of the themes is climate change. And even then, the option, it was just less of a conversation in the label music business community. And she's going to have a new record next year, and it feels like with the scale and of her as an artist, we will be able to maybe push the boat out and take a more expensive plant that has greener options and create a package that is really special that people will buy, but maybe it's one that we can experiment on. And those options weren't there really 5 years ago, so it's slowly moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it's, again, we have artists interested in wanting to press vinyl with the greenest possible plant, but it's just it can't happen in a timely manner that meets their needs, unfortunately. But the desire is there, and we want to do it, but I think we just need to find the right partners, really, and keep looking and hope that something good emerges. Because right now, we're kind of powerless, unfortunately. Yeah.
Handcuffed to the machine.
Yeah.
Audience members, this is your moment to participate and pick the brains of our lovely, very intelligent, thoughtful panelists. Any questions out there? Yes.
Are there any discussions about not producing physical media or physical copies of records? I guess because when I self-released a cassette this year and was like feeling kind of like gnarly about making pieces of plastic that people will probably not care about in 3 years and then throw into the Renaissance donation box and forget about. So I guess I'm just curious if that's part of the conversation at all, not producing physical media.
Yeah, it definitely is, like, for some projects. Like, also, it's like a conversation that's come out. Like, my boss Simon has said, like, like, what's the point of even doing this anymore because of these like crazy vinyl manufacturing times? And it's just like, maybe we need to like have the imagination and open-mindedness to like envision a different way it could work, and you just don't know really what that is yet. Like, I think the music industry's been in this sort of transitionary mode for like maybe like the whole time. I started working at Bell Union in 2010, and I feel like that was like the shifting from like of blogs into streaming, and like now we're just in a different place to what we were, and maybe that means we don't know how it's going to look in the future, and it will be something different. And for now, we are manufacturing for most of our artists because that's what they want, and we will sell the records. But I think like longer term, I can totally envision a future where like a lot less artists are manufacturing physical product, and maybe there is just something else that we don't know yet.
There's definitely projects where we can very easily say there's no need to press anything for this. They tend to be one-off singles, smaller releases, like 3 tracks, that kind of thing, which are still important for us, but they're not like what keeps the business running, unfortunately, and that is physical media for us. I can't speak for other labels. For some labels, it's like all digital. Some labels, there's a balance. I think we have that balance, but it's hard. I think there's definitely moments where we're like, okay, we don't need to go crazy on this. We can press like 500 vinyl or something, no CD, maybe cassette, but then it's still so much plastic, right? And then sometimes like cassette is the compromise when you still want to do physical media, but you don't want to press the vinyl because it takes too long or it doesn't make sense or it's too expensive. Your only alternative is just other kind of plastic, so it's not ideal. But you're probably pressing like fewer cassettes than vinyl realistically in most cases.
Similarly, the frustrations with the vinyl, we've had conversations about how can we innovate a different type of product that, something that is still tangible, because I think music fans want something that, beyond streaming that they can actually hold on to and have. But how do we think of just something different, outside of what these traditional means of music products? So it is something that we think a lot about. Haven't quite figured it out, but it is a topic of conversation.
Have you heard of the Galaxy 500 guy, Damon Krakowski, at all? He's a big commentator on all things, mostly streaming and like getting more money off of streaming for artists. But I think Galaxy 500 did a vinyl release that had no vinyl. So it was basically just the sleeve with like a book inside or something. And you still get the music digitally, of course, but I like those ideas because you're right, because like fans just want kind of the object in a lot of cases. I collect vinyl and I don't have a record player, but I kind of like having the objects that I work on for my job, like I like having those mementos. I'd be totally fine getting a record that didn't have wax inside. Like that would be cool to me. I'd be totally okay with that. So that's an idea that I've seen people do successfully.
We actually did a project on not Bella Union, but like a little DIY label that I'm involved in, and it's like with these smaller projects that you can like take a really wacky idea much easier. And the release was a sort of like contemporary classical opera about the life cycle of the bee. And for that, instead of creating any product, we created a product which was one of these like pieces of paper that you can like throw on dirt, and then it's full of seeds, and then it will sprout. Because people want something to buy to support the artists that they like, and we didn't. It's such a niche project. There was no demand or need to create something as environmentally heavy as vinyl or CD, but like this small thing was like easy to buy, easy to come across, and the flowers that would sprout from it are flowers that the bees like, so it all tied together really nice. So I think, just like having some creativity and thinking outside of like the traditional.
Any other audience questions?
I was getting water, but I'll ask a question. My name is Kim, and I'm with Music Declares Emergency Canada, and I want to thank all of you. I wish you had been here for some of the earlier panels, because we did get pretty into the weeds in terms of talking about vinyl and some of the innovation. Faye Milton, who started Music Declares out of the UK, was on, and there are some interesting bioplastics that are happening and some interesting things around pooling vinyl. But just wanted to encourage, if you're talking to folks and they're in Toronto or Canada, to try and get them to the summit, because one of the things we're really trying to do there is bring like people who are connected to policy, decision makers, politicians, in the same room as small labels, as big labels, as music industry associations, to kind of tackle some of these issues collectively. Because I know for a lot of small independent artists who are dependent on selling vinyl, and I'm someone who, I know the climate impact of streaming is quite large, and I have records that belong to my grandfather and my parents in my collection, so I know that it is something that can get passed down through generations. And if that's part of the message too, of like, when you buy vinyl, like, think about, is this something you're gonna hold on to for a really long time? And so talking about it in streaming, and how digitally, if you download it to your device, that's way better than streaming from the cloud. But I've never seen a music label put that, or an artist really, like, go with that message of, hey, I have a new song, go listen to it and download it. Because if you're an artist, you're stuck in that conundrum of, you want people to stream it a lot because your numbers, but like, so we have to tackle some of those pieces, not as an individual label or an individual artist, but as a music sector altogether, because it is an emergency, and so it's beyond tinkering. But I guess I'm just wondering, like, you've talked about a lot of the barriers. What are some concrete things that would help you do the kind of transformation that you know would be really impactful, like, and dramatic, because those kinds of dramatic changes are what's needed? What supports do you need?
I think just exactly what's happening right now, more conversation and education, and people that, the space to share when you figure out something that really works, so that you can like go to another label and say like, oh, hey, we did this with this plant, and it, the quality is really great, like, you should check it out. Or, just like having the space to talk about it and learn.
I think exactly what you described this summit is going to be, is getting people like us who have needs and getting them in the same room as people who can actually affect policy is what is needed most. Because, like, to answer your question, like, we need better partners. Like, that's really it. There's very few people in the industry that can do like what we need to do. And bioplastics in vinyl is like kind of such a new thing that it's like a wild, wild west in a way. So we need better partners and to be in the same room as policymakers, essentially.
I love that, we have organizations like Music Declares that are really focused on these things, and, it's just us coming together as a music community, and these are things that are important to us. Let's pool our resources together. Let's collaborate. Let's figure out how to do this.
Did you want to ask your question?
Hey, thank you for all the insights and perspectives. It was really cool hearing you guys talk today. My question would be, as a music label, and if you're starting off or you have many years of experience, what would be the first couple points to focus on when building a sustainable plan for your company? Or like, what's the first thing that you're like, oh, we gotta focus on this?
I guess like what is your business model as a label is kind of the first thing to consider, like, and then the rest will kind of come from there. So like if you have like an audience that is more of a physical media audience, then I guess that's when you have to take into account the questions of like, okay, what are we doing? Like, are we pressing vinyl? Is CD our thing? Is tapes our thing? Are like USB keys our thing? Like, are we doing digital, physical media kind of? Like, I think that would be where I would start with the question. As mentioned, like, downloading music is better because you're not having to talk to a server each time you want to listen to a new song, which passes through ad networks and all this other crap. That would be a good thing. The amazing benefit of that is that you make more money selling music than streaming music. So that would be a good business model, probably, but it's hard to get people to want to buy music digitally. So that would be probably the #1 barrier, but it would depend on your audience and whether or not they have an appreciation for one or the other.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the ethos and values of a company, and making sure that the environmental aspect of it is included and is at the forefront. I think there's a lot of great companies that do that. Patagonia, for example, they've been in the news recently. I think like Ben and Jerry's, like back in the day. There's, I think they aren't environmental companies, but it's very much in the fabric of their message and their ethos. And I think for us, Partisan as a label, it has become more and more important of a topic of conversation. But it really needs to be ingrained in the fabric of everything we do, every decision that we make, every, how we build our company, our intentions, and really have that be second nature to us.
Yeah, I agree with what Andy said, and I guess like being a newer label, you're free from the shackles of tradition. You can create new habits early and just get into good practice early and make that part of the way you operate. It's much harder to undo the way that you worked before than to just have the good fortune of being able to define exactly who you want to be going forward.
Thank you for your time.
I think we do have time for one more. Go ahead.
Thanks. Shall I take this off of here? I'm going to do that. If you're short for time, I hope that I don't spend all of it trying to articulate a question. But I'm thinking around some things and they don't easily form a question, so I thought I'll just come to the mic anyways. I have been working with Music Declares Emergency. I am a musician, jazz piano player. So I've self-released things and put them out on tiny labels. And then I book my own tours and my own performances. But in terms of thinking about, I was actually moderating the panel this morning on green touring and green live performance, and a lot of fantastic ideas came up, including a set of tools, Creative Green Tools Canada, which gives people, like, it's an extensive 2 years in it was in, sorry, Devon on the panel spent 2 years developing those tools from Julie's Bicycle Tools in the UK. And so there are actually really clear ways to measure the carbon footprint of a number of areas of arts presentation. And I'm not sure if things to do with pressing records is in that set of tools, but it would be interesting researching that. And then, but where I was going was that there are many ideas that came up in our talk this morning about how to tour in a lower carbon manner. And one of them being also creating a green rider, and where you could do things like, say, you won't have any plastic in your green room, or you want the venues. I mean, it's interesting. It would be worth looking at the website ACT, Artists Citizens on Tour, which is a group in Quebec helping arts organizations and artists lower their carbon footprint while they're touring and performing. So there were a bunch of areas that they have green riders, examples of them, and ways you can, write them, which I'm just getting familiar with myself. And I don't know if you're signed to a label, how much you'd be negotiating with the people who run the label about what goes in a green rider, because I don't have a label anymore. I just tour myself. But I'm wondering if the concept of I guess I'll try to bring this rambling thing together by saying, do any artists end up talking to you about creating green riders?
I think this is a very interesting question. I have just started talking to the artists on the label about doing accessibility riders. And I feel like it's this funny thing where it's like, man, are we gonna have to have an additional clause on our touring riders for every cause that we care about? It's like, you've got your tech rider, you've got your hospitality stuff, accessibility, green. So I think it's great. I think it's a really important way to move the conversation forward. And each artist needs to decide for themselves what is the most authentic and impactful way that they're going to make decisions around reducing their footprint and the causes that speak to them the most. So, I would love for everybody to have both an accessibility and a green rider. But if that doesn't feel authentic for an artist, we're not going to force them to do that either.
Yeah, I would just say at least at our label, we're not really involved in those conversations as much. I think they tend to happen between probably promoters and agents, or promoters and bands. But I think you touched on something all of these causes are interconnected in a way, right? So I think it is important to flex that as artists, to say, if you want this culture here, this is part of the price. So that.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here. Everyone give a round of applause to Andy, Annika, and Will.